Hello and welcome to Addicted to Lacrosse, Season 3, Episode 18. This is our final episode of the regular season. Today is Sunday, May the 1st, 2016. My name is Graham Perro, and with me, as always, are Melissa Daphne and Tyler Fitch. Lots to talk about tonight. Obviously, the regular season is over. The playoff matchups are set. We are going to make some, some predictions for the major awards. Not so much predictions, but who we think should be winning these awards. We have game predictions for the first couple of playoff games next weekend. A whole bunch of new records were set, so we'll look over those as well. And so lots of fun things to talk about. We'll start off with the records, and I just listed these in the order in which they happened rather than the order of importance, because the first one probably won't matter to anybody but the Mammoth fans in the crowd. John Grant is now the all-time scoring leader for the Mammoth. The number escapes me. I think it was 223 or somewhere in that area goals. He just passed Brian Langtry. Okay, so the next one, Callum Crawford, tied the single-season assist record of 83. One more assist and he would have set it, but couldn't quite get there. So he is now tied for that record with Sean Evans and Josh Sanderson, both of whom set it last year. So nice job, Mr. Crawford. The single-season goals record of 72, now owned by Dane Smith, beating Ethan Iannucci's 71, that I'm sure we talked about last year as being one of those probably unbreakable records, but obviously not. He also owns a new points record of 137, set by Sean Evans, passing Sean Evans, who had 130 last year. Next one, Curtis Dixon. Didn't set any records. Well, I guess this is probably a Roughnecks record for goals in a season. He hit 60 goals. Only 3 other players have ever done that, which would be Gary Gate, Ethan Iannucci, and Dane Smith, who had just done it last week, I guess. And rookie scoring record, sorry Tyler, is no longer owned by Reese Dutch. It is now Randy Stotts. But I did want to point out that Stotts had 5.22 points per game. Reese Dutch had his, was it 93? 90, 91?
89 points.
89? Okay.
Yeah.
But he did that in 16 games rather than in 18. So extending that to 18 games, Dutch would have ended up with 101 points. So you can put a little asterisk next to that if you want.
Exactly.
I kind of think that you have to, because when you do have more games and the record's broken, you're not comparing apples to oranges anymore. So you do have to put an asterisk.
Right, and at some point they'll expand the league to 16 teams and 24 or 30 games a season, and then all these records will fall, and then the only way to compare them would be per game, and then it kind of makes sense. But yeah, once you're playing different number of games, then these kind of records are definitely going to fall. Though in some cases it seems to be taking surprisingly long for some of these records to fall.
Nucci's goals per game thing, he'll hold on to that for quite a while, I suspect.
Yeah, I think he had a hat trick in every single game of the season, and I think they played a playoff game and he had a hat trick in that as well. So 17 straight games with a hat trick, and I'm pretty sure that's also a record. Another thing I want to talk about, and this was kind of interesting, now that Toronto and Vancouver are both out of the playoffs, I was looking over their numbers, and they basically had the same season. They both finished at 5-13, obviously both out of the playoffs, both last in their division. They were both 4-5 at home. They were both a pitiful 1-8 on the road, and coincidentally, Toronto's only road win was in Vancouver. Vancouver's road win was against Saskatchewan in the home opener. The Saskatchewan's home opener. Toronto was last in goals scored. Vancouver was second last. Vancouver was last in goals against. Toronto was third last. Actually, Georgia kind of snuck in the middle there. Toronto finished the year with 3 straight losses, Vancouver with 2. And Toronto lost 6 straight to start the year, while Vancouver lost 7 straight in the middle of the year. So, and both of them, and I didn't list this, but both of them dealt with all kinds of injuries to all kinds of players. Toronto never had any goaltending problems, other than Brandon Miller didn't play very well in the first 4 or 5 games. And Vancouver obviously had the issue with Tyler Richards not being around for the first handful of games. But it seemed like both teams had injuries just decimating their offense, their defense. Everybody else got hurt. Yeah, so the difference in their wins, Toronto beat the Bandits twice, which is not bad considering they're the #1 team in the league. But the other 3 wins were against non-playoff teams. On the other hand, Vancouver only won 5 games, but they beat Saskatchewan twice, Calgary twice, and Colorado once. So if you're only going to win a handful of games, you may as well beat your division rivals and give yourself a chance to get into the playoffs. And that's partially why they lasted so long this season, because they won the tiebreaker with Calgary. So it came down to their excuse me, to almost their last game of the season, and I guess it was Calgary's last game of the season. So that was kind of interesting. Yeah, so Tyler and I are disappointed with the results. Melissa, not so much, because her team is still in the playoffs.
Yeah, but I don't expect for much longer.
Yeah, good. That's true as well. And this actually, I'll give you a bit of a preview of tomorrow's NLL fact of the day. And I think we mentioned this last week. Since they won the championship in 2006, the Mammoth are 0-8 in the playoffs, and 6 of those 8 losses are to the Calgary Roughnecks. So guess who they play next weekend?
Yeah, Calgary. Well, and it's one of those things that even before they made it to the Cup game, they really didn't usually make it past the first round. I mean, the year they made it to the Cup was pretty much their only successful playoff run ever. And it's been 10 years. So, yeah, as a fan, my hopes aren't very high, and they're even less so now, but we can talk about that after we talk about Vancouver.
Okay, so let's get to the games of the week, and we'll go over those quickly because we've got a lot to talk about. And it'll be probably quickly for me because I was only able to see 2 of them. First one, Friday night, Vancouver in Colorado. This was the first of 3 games that needed to happen a certain way for Vancouver to make it into the playoffs, and it didn't. And that's through no fault of Vancouver's effort. I thought they played a really strong game. They knew this was a must-win or they were out, and they played really well. Unfortunately, the Mammoth played really well. Also, Dylan Ward had a great game. Reese Dutch was on fire. He had a really great game as well. Yeah, but Melissa and I were talking about this briefly before the show. It looked like Vancouver's game going into the 4th quarter. It was back and forth. Each team had leads and come back to tie it after the other one had a lead, and it kept going back and forth. Really entertaining game. Then Colorado scored 4 straight in the 4th, and that pretty much did it. Yeah, so like I said, entertaining game, strong effort from Vancouver, just wasn't quite enough. Tyler, this is your team. I suppose you saw this one?
Yeah, I watched the whole thing Friday night, and I was so nervous because Stealth had to win to keep all hope alive. Watched Reese have 9 points on the team's first 9 goals, and the last one ended up not getting a point on, but he was giving everything he could for the Stealth to win this game. The Mammoth, I don't know if they focused on it or if just because Reese was doing so much, but Joel McCready was very quiet, and usually we're looking for 1 or 2 goals out of him at times to spark the offense, and he didn't have any goals that I remember.
He had 1 assist.
Yeah. So even though you let Reese do whatever he did, he shut down McCready, and it really jammed things up. Is kind of the unsung story, I thought, of the effort that was put out there. I noticed a few times where I felt like Roy Smith was totally getting no help or sympathy from the ref. In fact, he was actively I think it was Gardonio even going against Rory. One time on a transition, John Grant, I think, just ran right through Rory, put him on his back. It was completely unnecessary, behind the play and in front of the ref, and there was no call. The ball immediately comes back down, and Rory's furious, and they get up with a loose ball right in front of him. Colorado player reaches out to grab it, and the Stealth player's there. Rory checks the Colorado player's stick and hand because the guy's going for the ball. He's in the action, and they called a slash for stopping the guy from getting the ball because the ref wanted to make sure Rory knew that he was in charge. So things like that were just, it didn't add up. The penalty didn't match what was happening on the floor, and the non-call didn't match, and that was frustrating to see. That it totally felt personal. It sucks. Pretty optimistic for the Mammoth now. I really thought that with the Stealth coming in with more or less their best lineup of the year, with people being healthy, that the Stealth could win it, and took a lead into the fourth quarter and weren't able to hold on. So that's a big bummer. And then I don't know, things imploded from there for the the next day, but we still have time to come to that. What are your thoughts here, Melissa?
I really thought this was Vancouver's game. I say that they played better than the Mammoth most of the game. I felt like they were kind of dominant until the fourth quarter, and I don't know what happened, but obviously they opened the door just enough for the Mammoth to come through and score those 4 goals, which were pretty quick. I mean, we had one 3 minutes in, one 5 minutes in, 6 minutes, 7, and almost 8 minutes. So they just had a flurry right then, and that was definitely the game. But up until that point, it really felt like Vancouver was going to win. I was kind of surprised that the Mammoth actually were able to eke it out. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying briefly, that my confidence in my team to make it past the first round is actually less, because they played these 2 teams that have been eliminated from the playoff. Not to take anything from those teams, because we have seen Vancouver play really well this season, and we've seen them play really bad. And unfortunately, we've just seen them play a little more bad lately. So Reese Dutch definitely seems to do well in Denver. This year, he didn't have Willie B. Hung riling him up, so there at least wasn't that. But he had a 9-point night. I mean, he had 5 goals, 4 assists. That's awesome. And that kind of speaks to how Vancouver was playing. Vancouver was playing well. The Mammoth just managed to steal the win, in my opinion. And so the way they looked against Toronto, the way they looked against Vancouver, I don't have high hopes going into next week. They're, whatever, if you want to say it's superstition, whatever. The Mammoth historically have not played well in the playoffs. And now they're playing the team that most of the time has knocked them out. So when they have gone in and they've been playing, they finished the season really strong. Like, they looked like a strong team. They looked like a playoff contention team, and they still lost. It's really hard to get excited about a team that the last few games, I don't know how they won, because they really weren't playing like a team that is going to the playoffs. They almost seemed like a different team. So this was Vancouver's game, in my opinion. They just made a few mistakes towards the end. There was definitely a lot of power play goals. I agree with Tyler that the reffing was a little contentious, I guess. They were calling it really super, super tight to begin with, like almost calling every just minor infraction, not hardly letting the guys play. And then they just started kind of being all over the place. And it was really nice, because I did watch this one on ESPN instead of actually at the Can, because I can't go to Friday night games. But the combination of having John Gallant on the floor commentating and Jamie Chushuk in the booth was just really awesome. It was really nice to hear a professional's opinion on some of these plays and issues and why a team might have done something. So I really hope that the Mammoth kind of keep that going forward. it seems like there's been some flux in the box there. But in all, I can't say that I was happy with the way the Mammoth played. I really do. I feel wholeheartedly that this was the Celts game for 3 of those 4 quarters, and some things just went wrong for him in the fourth, and it was kind of stolen away. What about you, Graham?
I want to echo what you said about having Shuchuk and Gallant there, having them share obviously their knowledge of the game, but their knowledge of the team as well, and even talking back and forth. Hey, what do you think about this play, and why do you think they did that? At one point, they were talking about the diamond versus the box defense when you're trying to kill a penalty. They used to do the diamond, but they're doing the box today, and I wonder if that's because of this and that and the other thing. These kind of insights are invaluable, and that's the kind of thing that you get when you have a player or former player, obviously, involved in the broadcast. And people like us, we can watch as many games as we want, and we're not going to pick up that kind of thing. So that's the kind of insight that they were giving, and it was great.
Yeah, that definitely is the kind of insight that comes from playing since you were a child. I mean, Shuchuk said that he didn't start playing until he was older because he played hockey beforehand. But I mean, even still, there's a lot of the same crossover, and so having that experience. I mean, we had it with Teddy Jenner and obviously Jake Elliott, but it was really nice, I think, having the tandem, especially because you had an offensive player and a defensive player that could really kind of bounce off one another. And I think that's what really made this one kind of stand out from previous players that have made that transition.
All right, let's move on. Actually, we may as well move on to the other Vancouver game. And I kind of wondered this last week if Vancouver won on a Friday night, I picked them to win on Saturday night as well, because obviously their playoff hopes would still be alive. The Toronto-Calgary game that also needed to work out in their favor wouldn't have happened yet, so they would still be fighting for that playoff spot against Georgia. But if they lose Friday, they might just say, okay, well, that's it, we're done. Let's get some rookies in there. Let's sit anybody who's remotely hurt, which I'm guessing is why Garrett Billings didn't play. And they just had nothing. Now, I didn't see this game. There were issues with the feed. Actually, there were issues on all the feeds on Saturday night. It was terrible. I couldn't see any of the game from Georgia, the game from Buffalo, or the game from Rochester. None of the feeds were working at all. And I managed to see most of the Toronto-Calgary one. They had issues with the feed there as well, but we'll get to that later. But in any case, I didn't see this game, so I really have nothing to say about it other than reading the score sheet. But Tyler, it looks like you watched this one. What do you think?
Yeah, boy, did I ever watch this game. Yeah, there's no conditional logic built into our picks. I thought there was no way this. There's probably some motivation on behalf of the Stealth for two things. First up, if they could beat the Swarm, they could maybe hold them out of the playoffs. I don't know if it was a sure thing, but the Swarm were winning, they're in, so they're pretty hugely motivated to make playoffs. Secondly, Randy Stats going for the rookie season point record. He had that about like 3 or 4 minutes into the game, so never mind that. They sat Billings. Generally, just I don't know. They had a rough travel day. Like they're delayed, and they had to still get all the way from Denver into the outskirts of Atlanta and play, which they did on time, but it was close. And with no motivation to play, the end result was a 10-1 halftime score in favor of the Swarm, and then 5-4 in the second half in favor of the Stealth. So they had that going for them, but I think the Swarm knew if they just hold on and don't get injured, they got a playoff game the following week. So I don't think that they kept their foot on the pedal at all. But it was a tough game to watch for the Stealth season to end. I know that if they were healthy throughout the whole year, it would have been entirely different. But this game, in some aspects, kind of summed up how the season went at times too. Yeah, any thoughts here, Melissa?
Yeah, unfortunately, I wasn't able to see this one. Same issues. We just can't seem to watch the Fox games. I was, I did pick Georgia, and I figured that the South would be somewhat tired from being in Denver, but I did not expect to see that score, especially the way they played on Friday. Um, it's just been one of those kinds of seasons for the South that they just can't seem to play a solid grouping of quarters, I guess, because they just have struggled so much. I think having Batley at the helm for next season from the get go is going to be a good start for them. I think some of the off-season changes they can make are going to be very good. I think hopefully they've definitely learned from some of this season. And I think we're going to see a different stealth team next year. But I agree with Tyler that it's really kind of depressing to see them go out on such a down note. And I remember there was one season with the Mammoth that even though they made it in the playoffs, that was kind of their last game of the season too, where they just got their butts handed to them, no question about it, where it just didn't seem like they were in the game whatsoever. So it's not a way you want to watch your team play. And so it's really hard. So even though I didn't see this one, I can understand that frustration. Did you see this one, or did you have anything else to add, Graham?
No, not really on that one. Yeah, like you said, it's disappointing just to see the season end that way. And then you've got to wonder, and maybe we need to talk about this on a future show. Um, what's next for the Stealth? Do they say, okay, we had a good team this year. If it wasn't for the injuries, we would have had a much better season, obviously. Starting off the year, like you said, with our new coach and hopefully staying healthy, we could be a totally different team. Or do they say, nope, this didn't work, let's blow it up and start trading people and make all kinds of changes? Um, and obviously Toronto can say the same thing. What are they going to do in the off season? Yeah, so that maybe we may want to talk about in one of the shows during the playoffs because there'll only be a handful of games each week. Moving on to the next game, which I also didn't see, New England over Buffalo, 12-7. The one stat that jumps out at me on this game is a single goal from Sean Evans, and I think that was at least partially because he was apparently knocked into the boards by somebody. I didn't actually see who it was, though I did see it described as a dirty play, and he headed to the dressing room and never came back. So I don't know how much of the game he played, but it wasn't much. He did actually tweet something during the game, basically saying something along the lines of the refs need to really. I can't remember what it was he said, but basically he was talking about the refs and how they need to do a better job. Players are getting hurt, and he was quite upset about it. The tweet got deleted a few minutes later. But I did actually take a screenshot of it while it was there because I heard that it was later deleted. Yeah, so apparently he wasn't too happy about that. I don't know who hit him or anything about it, but yeah. So Dane Smith with 6 points, a fairly low night for him actually, but it was enough to give him the goal and point records that we talked about earlier. The only other interesting thing in this game that I saw was Anthony Cosmo only played about 9 minutes, and then he got hurt. He was taken out, and David DeRuscio played the rest of the game and did a great job. He faced 49 shots and only allowed 6 goals. Cosmo tweeted today that it was just a minor thing. Was out for that game, but he should be fine to go next week. And as it turns out, he doesn't need to be fine to go next week because they don't have a game next week. They have a bye in the first round, so he'll have 2 full weeks to recover from whatever that was, and he should be fine. Either of you guys see this game?
Unfortunately, nope. This falls into the Fox issue. Did you see this one, Tyler?
Same exact time as the stealth game, and despite the stealth game being non-competitive by the half-hour point afterwards that this started, I stuck with my team and didn't really watch this one or the other one that started. It's just 3 games at once, and there'd be a lot of computer devices running.
Yeah, I've seen other people tweet things, and they show pictures, and there's their big screen TV with one game, and they have a laptop in front of them with another game, and then they're holding their tablet or their phone or something with a third game, and they have all 3 going at the same time. I cannot do that. I can't pay attention to more than one game at once. So I basically pick one and go with it until either the feed gets choppy and I can't watch it, or it drops, or one hits halftime and the other one's still going. Then I switch, but I can't watch more than one at once.
We've
I don't know.
definitely done that a few times where you had multiple games going, but I agree that you really can only focus on one for bits, so you're still missing stuff. There's no way you can see it all. No matter how you have your setup, you cannot watch more than one game. So
So I guess
it's
you can
kind of
kind
crazy.
of, I guess you can kind of watch one and listen for loud voices on one of the other ones, and then see what's happening over there. And I know when previous years when we had it on YouTube, you could go see what the voices were and then back up a minute or so and then watch the play actually unfold. That's not available this year. So once you hear the loud voices, the thing's already happened, and you can at least look over to see what that was, and you might catch a replay, but that's about it.
Yeah, and that's definitely not the same. I mean, I really miss YouTube. This season was frustrating, and we got new issue this weekend with the Fox Sports that this week it was trying to require us to log in with our service provider, which is different. But this season has just been a wash. Like if it was on Fox, I was almost guaranteed to not be able to watch it. So
And unfortunately, that was most of the games.
Yeah, they
Okay.
updated the app this week too. So like, I went to watch the game Saturday, and it's like, oh, I need to update the app before I can even watch it. So that sucks. And they changed some of the user experience. There used to be a little button that says, all right, push to my Apple TV so I can watch on the big screen. And now I had to do it a totally different way. But I was thinking I was going to watch the whole game on my tablet, which it's not the worst thing in the world, but it's not what I'm used to. I was able to power through and make it work.
Yeah, I think that was part of the problem with the Canadian viewers, that I think, other than the NLL, you generally can't get anything from Fox Sports Go in Canada. It's just not available. And so part of the NLL deal was, we need to make this available to our fans in Canada because we have lots of them. And so they managed to do something, but it sounded like you said, they were changing changing some stuff on the back end, and so clearly they didn't get that stuff working in Canada, probably because the NLL is their only customer in Canada, as far as I know. So
Yeah. Being a software developer, I know that they probably built it, pushed it live, and then somebody said, oh, these games, they show those in Canada, we need to work for that. And somebody's like, we just spent 2-3 months building this whole thing and nobody even told us about that. That's totally what happened, even though I wasn't there. I just feel like with certainty, that's the industry.
but it's certainly not the developers that were the issue there. It was certainly program management.
Without doubt.
Okay, clearly neither Tyler or I work in project management.
And not one of those developers is apparently a Lacrosse fan. They would have been like, oh, yeah, don't forget about. You got to cover their butts.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Next game, hey, I didn't see this one either. Saskatchewan, Rochester. Saskatchewan 13, Rochester 9. I didn't look at this one too closely. 5 goals for Zach Greer, not bad. Kind of spread out on the Nighthawks side. Cody Jamieson and Dan Dawson had 5 each. What else interesting in this one? Saskatchewan scored 7 in a row in the second quarter. That pretty much did it, because it looks fairly even other than that one big run. But I didn't see this one. Didn't sound like either of you guys saw this one either. So
I watched. I ended up switching into the fourth quarter of this, I realized, before I went over to the Toronto-Calgary game when the stealth game ended. It was, I'm trying to do the math here. Take away 2. Yeah, it was a little close early in the fourth quarter. It was only a 2-goal game, I think. No. 1-4. I just forgot. No, I guess it wasn't that close, but don't know what to say here other than Saskatchewan's better when Zach Greer's back. I love that the Stealth got to beat them without him around. I don't necessarily know they would have even been playing for a chance this weekend if he was there in Vancouver a week ago.
all right, and the last game. Well, no, sorry, it's not the last game. It's the last game that I had any experience with, and that was Toronto-Calgary. This one, and we'll just quickly start off with talking about the feed, because we talked about the other feeds as well. This one was weird for me because it was on through Fox Sports Go as well. It was not on TSN in Canada, but it was on our local cable company, which is Cogeco in parts of Southern Ontario anyway. Rogers is most of Southern Ontario, but there are certainly pockets that have Cogeco, and that's where I am. Cogeco actually sort of simulcast this game. So what they did was they took the regular Fox Sports Go feed and televised it. And every time the Fox Sports Go feed went to commercial, they cut from that and went to their two local hosts in Toronto, and the two local guys gave some commentary and talked about the game. And then they'd go right back to the feed again. And that works fine, and they've done that for previous games until the feed drops, and especially when the feed drops every 5 minutes or so. So the feed would drop, we'd get a big screen of nothing, and then right back to the host and say, okay, well, we were having trouble with our feed, so we're going to work on that. But meanwhile, let's talk about the Rock Power play. Let's talk about the Calgary, whatever it was, transition game.
That sounds incredible. Like it was Wayne's World lacrosse broadcast.
It was actually it didn't look like Wayne's World, but it was pretty well done. Two young guys were doing the feed, Pat Gregoire and Ian Duffy. Ian Duffy looks like a tiny little guy. Now he's sitting down. It's hard to tell how tall he is, but he looks pretty small. And they mentioned a couple times that he's a goaltender. So he plays the game. He knows what's going on. They both are pretty knowledgeable about the game as well as about the teams. Though Gregoire did talk about Jamie DeWick, the Rock owner, and somebody said Scigliano for Frankie. So there are a few issues there, but the fact that they did 80% of their broadcast basically ad-libbing, rather than just coming on at the commercials, talking for 2 minutes and back to the game, they had to fill in all kinds of time because the feed just kept dropping, and so they'd go away, they'd miss a couple of goals, and they'd come back, and then they'd go back to the game, and they'd play for 30 seconds, and they'd have to come back and talk for another 5 minutes while the game was off. So I thought they did a really good job, so props to those guys. On to the game itself. Yeah, with all due respect to the Stealth, this was a meaningless game for the Rock, just as the Georgia one was for the Stealth, but you'd never know it from how the Rock were playing. They didn't have Colin Doyle. They didn't have Josh Sanderson, who was a scratch. They didn't even have Stephen LeBlanc because he was out because I think his wife was in labor or had just given birth, one or the other. I can't remember exactly which one it was. And of course, half the rest of the team were injured as well, but that was been true for half the season. But they put forth a very strong performance against Calgary. Rob Hellier had 13 points. He's just been lighting up everybody this year. I think he finished third or fourth overall in points this year. Not bad for a team who only won 5 games. Turner Evans had an excellent game with 9 points as well. And just to illustrate how injured the team was, the Toronto forwards, there were only 6 of them, included 3 rookies, which were Dan Littner, Tyler Evans. Everybody's named Tyler, right? Turner Evans and Kyle Ackwin. I guess Lintner has been there most of the year. Evans was a healthy scratch for first half the season, most of it anyway. And I think Kyle Ackwin's only played about 2 games. But they played really well. Obviously took the Roughnecks to overtime where they lost, but I thought they put forth a much stronger effort than you might have expected from a team that's already been booted from the playoffs. One of the guys on the broadcast actually said, and this made sense, this is not so much we want to win this game. I mean, part of it is, but part of it was especially for the young guys, sort of an audition for next year. In that, if you're not willing to get yourself motivated and play your butt off in a game that really doesn't mean anything, we don't want you here. They're clearly going to be making some changes to the team in the offseason, and they wanted these young guys to go out there and prove that they deserved a spot. And so they got a good performance from them. And this is interesting. They also said Westberg had 6 goals, including the overtime winner. Berg had 67 points this season, which is amazing for a rookie. But he may not even end up on the ballot for Rookie of the Year. There were so many strong rookie performances this year with Randy Stotts and with Jesse King, with Thompson, Lyle Thompson. I was going to say the Thompson brothers, but obviously Miles was not a rookie this year. But non-offensive guys like Chad Tutton and Graham Hossick as well. So, yeah, strong rookie crop this year. So, anyway, entertaining game. Unfortunate for the Rock that they ended up on the losing end of it, but yeah, good job for Calgary. Tyler, did you see this one?
Yeah, I turned this on, and it was just, track meet. I couldn't believe it. 4-4, 8-6. The Rock led, and then Calgary lit it up in the third quarter, so it was 13-10. That was 7 goals for them. Toronto returns the favor with 7 goals of their own in the fourth quarter. So we're tied at 17. Just incredible action. And about 4 minutes of overtime. We're considering the pace of the game before. We're just waiting for a goal on every single possession. It was pretty incredible. I totally despise the Roughnecks, but loved watching this game. What are your thoughts here, Melissa?
I am shocked looking at the score. This is one of those games. I mean, what we've talked about Toronto, how last week against the Mammoth, they were dressing players just to fill seats because they didn't have enough players. Just to see them pull off 17 goals against a team that is in the playoffs and Toronto isn't. If they would have played like this against the Mammoth, I don't know that the Mammoth would have stood a chance. It's very interesting to see that each team had a 7-goal quarter, because that in and of itself is pretty unusual. And so to have Toronto in the fourth and Calgary in the third, both each with 7 goals, and for this to go to overtime, I don't think any of us would have expected this. And so to see, as we were talking about the stealth, that the stealth ended on such a down note, Toronto can really go into the offseason kind of with their heads held high, because they really finished strong. I mean, they just played their butts off against a playoff team. And so, yeah, that's just crazy. I think I'm not looking forward to next weekend.
All right, and last game of the week, I didn't see this one either. Rochester took out New England 10-8. All 3 of us picked New England to win this game, but by this point, Rochester had already been booted from the playoffs. New England had already cemented second place, so it was kind of a meaningless game for both. Yeah, I'm just looking over the score sheet now. Yeah, nothing really jumps out. Sean Evans did not play this game. I think that was partially due. Well, it was due to the injury he received on Saturday night. Though apparently he was just basically resting because they didn't need to play this game, so he was resting to make sure that he's available for next weekend. And we will get to the playoff games in a minute. But did either of you see this one?
Yeah, I had it on in the background today, so I watched the first and the fourth quarter when I wasn't doing stuff. And yeah, the outcome surprised me a little bit. I think maybe Rochester had some of the same attitude. Yeah, right? You think so? Rochester had some of the same attitude as the Rock players of, well, better play for our jobs and prove why they kept us around all year. But I think more importantly was New England missing Sean Evans on offense. Absolutely the quarterback and leader of them. He's worth 2, maybe 3 goals a game, if not more. I think he's probably averaging 4 or 5 points a game. So that's more than 2. But the game would have been different. I think we could have had New England winning it if Sean Evans was in there. But again, we don't get conditional picks based on what ifs. We pick it tonight for next week and hold on and see what happens. What do you think, Melissa?
So yeah, this was another one with the Fox issue that, must have your cable provider. So we did not get to watch this one. I definitely think knowing that Sean Evans wasn't playing, that definitely impacts, your view of the game. I don't know that New England really, like you said, they really had nothing to prove in this game. Why risk, injury? So they may not put it all out there. Yeah, it's hard to say, but it's definitely interesting, especially after just talking about the last game where you have 17 and 18 goals, that we have 10 and 8 goals. So both teams combined is the same as the winning score of the last game. So it's gonna be interesting, and I think it's definitely gonna be a good discussion in the next couple of weeks when we do start talking about who we think is gonna make those rosters. Because no, I think all of us picked Rochester to finish pretty high this season, and just have them eliminated. Graham, do you know how many times the Nighthawks have never made the playoffs? Like how many times they didn't make them at all?
I believe this is the third time in their history.
First time since 2010, I think.
They did not make the playoffs in 2008 or in 2010, and that's it. Every other year since 1995, the Nighthawks have been in the playoffs.
So yeah, you put that out there. I mean, that's pretty impressive. And they have a phenomenal goalie in Matt Vince, who just seems to have had a bad season this year. So this, I think this game nobody really had much on the line, but Rochester obviously didn't give up. So don't have much to add other than what you guys said, since I couldn't watch this one, stupid Fox. But it's interesting just to see. I mean, you always wonder when it's the last game of the season, there's nothing on the line. Are you going to see two teams still go at it because the players are so competitive that they can't take it easy? Or are you going to see those games where you're like, oh, yeah, you already phoned it in this season. Okay. Yeah. Because we've seen both. And so you never know.
All right. And since you asked, Tyler, Sean Evans is averaging 3 goals a game this year and 4 assists a game. So 7 points each in every game. So
That's a
not
lot.
bad. Not bad. It's no Dane Evans, but it's not bad. Or Dane Evans, there it is again. Dane Smith. Dane Smith averaged 4 goals a game and 3.61 assists. So he's actually behind in assists. But he averaged 7.61 points per game. The assists leader this year was Callum Crawford, who averaged 4.61 assists per game, which allowed him, as I said before, to tie that record. Speaking of great players, let's get on to our predictions for the major awards of the year. And first off, we'll go over our preseason predictions, what we thought was going to happen at the beginning of the year. And some of them are just wrong. Some of them looked like reasonable guesses that just didn't happen to work out. For instance, all 3 of us picked Mark Matthews as the MVP. Generally, that's a good guess, and he did finish with 109 points, 6th overall, 40 goals. So he had a very good season. He just did not have an MVP season, I don't think. Rookie of the year, Melissa and I both went with Wes Berg, and Tyler went with Jesse King. And as we said before, these 2 players are both decent options for Rookie of the Year, given how things have worked out. Transition player, I went with Carson Leung, who didn't have his best season. Tyler went with Jeremy Thompson, as did Melissa. Defensive player, I went with Sid Smith, and Tyler went with Brett Manny.
I love you, Brett.
And Melissa went with Chris Corbeil. For goalie of the year, I went with Aaron Bold, and you guys both chose Matt Vince to repeat as his 43rd, I believe, goalie of the year award in a row. Okay, so what we did this time is we will be listing our picks for the awards. Now, these are not predictions. These are not who we think will win. These are who we think should win. And they may or may not be the same. But, yeah, I guess we'll start with MVP, just because that's the big one. And I'm going to buck the trend. We talked about this last week, or 2 weeks ago, I can't remember which, about Dane Smith basically being a lock for MVP given the numbers that he's put up this year. But I'm going to, and I think I might have even agreed with that at that point, but I thought about it since then, and I think I'm going to go with Sean Evans to repeat as MVP. As we were just saying, the Black Wolves without Sean Evans are a pretty decent lacrosse team, but with Sean Evans, they're a playoff lacrosse team. I think basically he's turned that team around. Obviously, the coaching change has made a big difference, but he's more of the kind of guy who will make everybody around him better, and the other guys on that team have all had great seasons. And maybe that's just because they had a great season, but I think part of it is because they're playing with Sean Evans. And so I think the Black Wolves minus Sean Evans is a bigger difference than the Bandits minus Dane Smith. So that would be my choice for MVP. Tyler, what do you think?
Yeah, it's the discussion we have several times a year of most valuable to your team or just the best player in the league. I'm going with Dane Smith. I think he was easily the best player in the league, setting scoring records. And Buffalo won the East. And without him, I don't know who they could get to fill in. And it's an equal battle, pretty equal to the discussion point. And Dane Smith had better points. So I'm going with Dane Smith. How about you, Melissa?
I think a strong case can be made for either of them, but I feel like in the past the league tends to go with record breakers. And so I think the fact that Dane Smith has had such a phenomenal season and has been pretty much the top offensive player of the season is pretty much going to give him that award. I mean, that was definitely an impact with Sean Evans last year. But I think you could make a case. And I do agree with what Graham said that Sean Evans, you could definitely see the difference in play with the teams. But Dane Smith has just been such a dominant force to be reckoned with this season. I think without him, it would be a completely different scenario all around. So I'm going to go with him.
All right. Goalie of the year is a tougher one for me anyway. I thought no single goalie stood out this year as head and shoulders above the rest. Actually, the last couple of years, it's been two that were head and shoulders above the rest, and it was just a choice of whether it was Aaron Bold or Matt Vince. This year, Bold had a very good season, not as dominant as his previous couple. Vince didn't have a great season at all. I went with Nick Rose only because there were a number of times when the Rock really needed a great goaltending performance to try and boost their confidence and just get them back into the swing of things. And more often than not, Rose gave them that. There were issues in the first handful of games where they couldn't score at all, and those games weren't Brandon Miller's fault. There were a couple of other games where they scored a bunch of goals but got completely destroyed defensively, and those might have been Brandon Miller's fault. But I thought Nick Rose played a lot of really great games and kept his team in it, and so in the absence of somebody being really dominant, I would go with Nick Rose as the goalie of the year, and maybe that's my Toronto bias showing. I don't know, but I'm going to go with Rose. Tyler, you're next.
Sure. So for this one, I tried to go with the goalie who was a number one goalie on the team, played every game all year, and led the team to success. And I'm going with Evan Kirk here out of New England. I think he was rock solid for them. Had no doubt that he was the number one. A lot of teams, almost every team I can think of, even Goodleaf started a couple games for Rochester where usually it's always Vince. But I think off the top of my head, only Aaron Bold and Evan Kirk started every game as the number one goalie, I think. And Bold had a great season, but I think Kirk was just a little bit better and should be recognized for that. And that's where I ended up. How about you, Melissa?
So I am going with the hometown hero, Dylan Ward. He has, at least going into this weekend, he had the best goal against average. And he's been playing really well. And with them being in the playoffs, I think he's just a little bit more standout than some of them. but that also could be biased because it's been the Mammoth games that I've been lucky enough to see most of because they've been on ESPN. So I won't deny that there's probably some bias there. But he's just been a brick wall this season, and so I could definitely see him being recognized. He makes me think of Matt Vince and Aaron Bold have how they've been playing the past few seasons, so I could see him definitely taking that award.
Other than Zach Boychuk, who made 4 saves on 4 shots this season, Dylan Ward has the highest save percentage in the league of 80%, so nice job there. And he also has the second lowest goals against average of starters. Aaron Bold is at 10.3 and Dylan Ward was at 10.33, so just barely off of winning both the goals against and the save percentage. So yeah, you could certainly make a case for both Kirk and Ward. Transition Player of the Year. This is a hard one, as Melissa was talking about before the show, because there are some players that are listed as transition but kind of don't play transition, and others who are listed as defenders who play transition, but transition is a kind of a vague, hand-wavy thing where a lot of times a transition player is just a defender who runs fast, and a pure stay-at-home defender is a defender who can't run. So it's hard to pick who's transition and who's not. But one of the best transition teams in the league was the Buffalo Bandits, and I think Alex Keto Hill was a large part of that, so I'm going to pick Keto Hill as my transition player of the year. He was, I meant to look at his numbers, but I think he was one of the highest scoring non-offensive players of the year, and why can't I find him? There he is. 38 points and 16 goals. 120 loose balls. So he even won 1 out of 2 faceoffs. So there you go. And on a team with Jay Thornberry, winning any faceoffs at all, actually taking any faceoffs at all, is impressive. He must have done that when Thornberry was in the penalty box or something. But in any case, Keto Hill would be my pick for transition. Tyler, you went first the last couple of times, so Melissa, you can go first this time.
Of course, come to me. Yeah, come to me because I figure, you're gonna go with Tyler. I'm gonna play with my heater. Okay. So yeah, like you said, with transition, it's really hard because you don't know who is truly going to be considered for this award. Because there's been some years that if a player was not specifically listed as transition, they were considered out of contention. But then we had last year where Joey Cupido won, but he was listed as defender. So where is that actual line? And then add to the fact that I haven't gotten to see most of the other teams play this season because most of the games have been on Fox. So my opinion is very skewed based on either the stat sheets or others' opinions. So I really didn't have a strong case. So I chose Jesse King based on some of his stats, but I really can't argue for or against him. I could probably make just as strong of a case for Alex Keto Hill, and I almost put him down. So yeah, this is one pick that I'm just like, yeah, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. So what about you, Tyler?
I think Graham was on the right path, right team, but wrong player. I like Jay Thornberry coming out of Buffalo here to be the top transition player in the league. Second straight year, he's been very dominant in faceoffs, and I think time to get a recognition for that. So I'm picking Mr. Thornberry to win the Transition Player of the Year for 2016. What's next, Graham?
All right, next would be the Defender of the Year, and this is another one that's tough. Partially because there are no stats to look at. I mean, there is the caused turnover stat, but I personally don't really know how they decide when to give somebody one of those. So I don't really know much about it. It's certainly not one of the major stats that most people look at, as far as I know. So you just kind of have to watch the games and see who stands out. But again, like we were talking about before, sometimes the best defender is the one whose name you never hear. Yeah, so I went with Chris Corbeil this year. Going with Kyle Rubisch is usually a pretty good guess because I think he's won the last 4 of them. But Corbeil has always been one of the runners-up, or at least the last couple of years he's been one of the runners-up. And you might even consider Corbeil a transition player, because I've certainly seen him make some great defensive play, grab the ball, race up the other end of the floor, and score. But I just kind of noticed him a little more this year in terms of stick checks. He'd check the ball out of somebody's stick and grab it and take off, or grab it and pass it to somebody for a quick transition chance. And just trying to get by him is tough. He's a big, solid guy, and yeah, I think he had a great season, and so I'm going with Corbeil. So Melissa, what do you think?
This was another one, like you said, there's not specifically stats that you can go by, and some of your best defenders really aren't players that draw attention to themselves. We bring up John Gallant a lot because he was one of those players that, for the most part, you never noticed him on the floor. He just was, such a grinder. He just had his head down and did his job, essentially. But once you noticed him, it was amazing how crucial he was to almost every play. And he had this huge impact every game he played in. But he wasn't loud on the floor. Well, I say that because I've heard stories that he is actually quite the trash talker and could incite some of the calmest players into different types of actions. But in general, when you think of loud players, like you think of Billy D. Smith or some of the players like that, you don't think of John Gallant as one of those players. So he doesn't bring attention to himself. So it is really hard to pick a defensive player of the year because some of the best players you never notice. And especially, as I've already said, I didn't get to see so many of the games this year because of Fox. So it's that much harder because I'm limited on what I watched. I could definitely make the same case that you did for Chris Corbell, and I almost had him chosen. But Steve Priolo is one that we often talk about, so I'm going with him, but I can't say that I'm particularly strong in that decision because there are a lot of good defenders, and it's really hard to say who had that biggest impact because, for one thing, if what they're defending is actually not on camera, you don't even ever see it unless you're in the arena. And that's probably why with John Gallant I'm more familiar with some of his play because I was at the arena, and so I could see some of the stuff he was doing that was actually not on camera. So yeah, I'm picking Steve Priolo, but I could pick a good handful of people. What about you, Tyler?
Yeah, I'm wondering if Kyle Rubisch has just set the bar so high that when he does extreme damage on defense, you don't even know it. And it's just so typical that we don't have any expectation for anything different. But I am going to put some weight into the cause turnover stat, and Ryan Dilks had like 15 more than the next highest person. He had like 51, and second place was 36, somewhere along those lines. So he was creating turnovers and causing havoc on the defensive end, and they found some way to quantify it using those caused turnovers, and he dominated the league at that particular aspect. So as a defender, I think that should be given a fair amount of weight, and I'm giving him my pick here for Defender of the Year accordingly.
All right. And the last one should be fairly quick because we all picked the same guy. Rookie of the Year. We talked about this earlier about how there wasn't one guy that really stood out as the obvious choice, but I think Randy Stotts comes about as close as you can get with this kind of group. He ended up with 94 points, 36 goals, led his team in scoring. Led all rookies in scoring, obviously set the new rookie record for scoring, and was just a dominant force on a pretty impressive offensive squad. So I went with Randy Stotts. Both of you guys also went with Stotts. Anything else to add? Melissa, what do you think?
Yeah, this is one that I will say was influenced by the two of you guys, so I don't have much to add because I really couldn't pick anybody, and so defaulted. Tyler?
I'm still mad he got rookie points record. But he was the cream of the crop. Nobody put up more points than him as a rookie, which is not entirely fair to people like Graham Hossack, play defense. But I think he was a cut above everybody else. He wasn't even kind of considered the number one pick, but he had a great season and should be rewarded with the Rookie of the Year for his effort.
All right, so those are our choices for some of the major awards. Moving on to our predictions, and we'll go over these fairly quickly because we had a pretty good weekend. Well, I had a pretty good weekend, and Melissa had a pretty good weekend, and Tyler
picked with his heart.
True enough.
Well, but to be fair, at least one of those games, I really thought Tyler was going to be right on and we were going to be wrong. So.
True enough. Actually, yeah, 3/4 of the way through the Vancouver Colorado game, either pick would have been good. Obviously, it didn't work out that way. So Melissa and I went 5-1, only missing New England today, and Tyler went 3-3, missing New England today and the 2 Vancouver games. So good news for all of you listeners. I'm sure you were all excited about the fact that all 3 of us finished above 500 on the season. And I have the lowest record, so I am the most excited of all of us that I hit 500. If Melissa had ended up as close to 500 as I would, that would have meant a total collapse in the last couple of weeks. But she didn't. Melissa is our winner this year at 50-31. Nice job, Melissa. Tyler's right behind, well, kind of right behind her, at 43-38, and then I'm a couple behind Tyler at 41-40.
Yeah, I'm more right in front of you than right behind her.
Fair enough. So when I say just above 500, I mean just above 500. I was, one off, and I was 40-41. But it does mean that in the IL Endor staff picks, I did not end up in last place. I believe I actually squeaked by Marty O'Neill in the last week. So that is also good news. Only 2 games next week. Georgia is playing in New England. I believe that's on Friday night. I don't actually have the actual dates. And then Calgary is playing in Colorado, and I think that one's on Saturday. But I may have them backwards. I can't remember.
I think that's right.
So only a couple picks to make. Melissa, we'll let you go first, as we have done all season long. But we're all starting at 0-0 now, so we may have to break with tradition next week.
Yeah, we'll see. It's definitely been unusual this season since I think last year I was last on every season or every game. Georgia and New England, I had a hard time picking because both teams have had moments of just phenomenal play and, oh my gosh, what are you doing play? So it's really kind of tough between these. I'm going to go with New England, but I was very close to picking Georgia on this. I think if New England underestimates their opponent whatsoever, that Georgia will definitely kick that door wide open. So New England needs to go in and play hard and not give an ounce of leeway. With Calgary and Colorado, I'm a little more confident. I will be going with Calgary. As we've discussed, they have knocked the Mammoth out of the playoffs 7 times, 6 of those times in the past 8 years. So it's a pretty solid bet. I don't like the way Colorado has been playing, and there is rumor that Adam Jones will not be playing again due to visa issues. I don't know the validity of that, but that is the rumor that there's some visa issues, and that's part of why we haven't seen him. So you add that in on top of everything else, and yeah, I just don't have any confidence whatsoever in my team. What about you, Tyler?
If the Stealth had been able to beat Colorado and kind of upset their flow here and into the regular season on a down note, I think I would pick Calgary to win this game. But Colorado persevered through the missing Adam Jones, and he my pick is pretty conditional on that he would be there because he's a big difference maker generally, will always score a goal when he's in the game. But Colorado has a little better lineup, not a bunch. This would be a great game, but I can see them beating the Roughnecks and moving forward from that game. So I've got Colorado winning there. And the other game, sorry. Georgia, New England. Yep, Georgia, New England. Like Melissa said, there's some inconsistency there, but I think way more inconsistency on Georgia. And I'd like to see New England get the win. I think they can do it regardless if Sean Evans is available. But I think the Georgia players are in a spot where maybe they're too young to know that they shouldn't win games necessarily. They kind of had that stretch a few years ago where they got hot in, I want to say 2011, won a playoff game when they had a bunch of rookies. And Ed Camo's a great coach there, but throughout the season, New England's been better, and I'm picking them to win this game. And your picks, Graham?
All right. Georgia, New England. I definitely agree with Melissa's statement that if New England underestimates the Swarm at all, they're toast. But I don't see that happening. Sean Evans being Sean Evans, he's going to get them riled up. He's going to make sure that everybody plays their butt off and plays as hard as they can. And, yeah, I'm going with New England on that one. Calgary, Colorado. I'm pretty sure I did fill in Colorado at this point and then sort of said, I'm not sure about that, and then left it blank for another couple hours before I finally picked Calgary to do what they just have done all the time, and that is beat Colorado in the playoffs. Yeah, if Colorado plays the way they are capable of playing, and we've seen it, most of this year, they certainly ended up with a winning record and had a good season. They can win this game, but yeah, I'm gonna go with the Roughnecks this week, and then probably whoever wins this series will end up losing to the Rush anyway. So that would be my pick. Yeah, so that will do it for this week, and pretty long show, but we talked about a lot of fun stuff. Yeah, next week we only have the 2 games to talk about, and then yeah, we'll see what else comes up in the meantime. Maybe some team will announce that they're moving because playoff time is apparently the time to do that. Yeah, so that's it for this week. This has been another episode of Addicted to Lacrosse. For Tyler and Melissa, I'm Graham. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.